Shrishti, please start.
Okay, Di. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third virtual Global Summer School of Law and Ethics of International Intelligence, organized by Knowledge Teas in collaboration with South Ural State University, Management and Science University, the Ural State Law University, Manipal University, Jaipur, Sohar University, Sultan Idris Education University, Moscow State University. We are excited to have you join us online. My name is Shrishti Agarwal, and I will be the moderator for this session. Now, without any further ado, I would like to welcome our speaker of this session, Professor Dr. Antonetta Ilya. Dr. Ilya delivers seminars and presentations at many international conferences in US, China, South Korea, Bosnia, Turkey, India, etc. She is an international nominee to the Global Leadership Prize, Elysian Tolberg Foundation, North-South Prize for the Council of Europe as member of the Mediterranean Network of Experts on Climate Change. She has been the former candidate to the Indian seat of the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture. In 2021, she received the positive evaluation to Distinguished Professor of the International Law at the highest score. She was the visiting professor of International Law and Human Rights, Inter-American Academy of Human Rights, as well as the member of International Advisory Board of the Gita Institute of Law, India. She has also been the visitor professor at China Youth University of Political Sciences. She is also an expert practitioner on human rights and HIV and vice director of the International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue, France. Last but not the least, Dr. Ilya is the editorial board member of numerous international specialized journals and of many professional networks and international associations, including the Climate Change Litigation Network at the Siberian Center, Columbia University, US. Welcome, ma'am. Please start the session.
Thank you very much, Madam, for giving me the floor for that introduction. So before to start, I would like to ask you, please, how many time I will have to deliver that presentation? Between 30 and 40 minutes, right? Because I would like to give the floor to the audience as much as I could.
Yes, ma'am, 30 to 40 minutes.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be with all of you today. Don't fear, I'm not an expert. I'm just the first student between all of you. So that's why I feel so privileged to be among all of you today. So actually, I think that there was no mention about what would have been our topic today, because the question related to artificial intelligence are really defined and include transversal and different aspects. But as you probably know, as human rights professor, academic, and practitioner, but I prefer to say engaged person before everything, what is central to me is to reflect together about possible impacts over human rights effectiveness from one side. But from the other side, we are going to have a short introduction about a possible regulation or ongoing negotiation about regulation of the use of artificial intelligence from this side of the globe, especially in Europe, at the level of European Union. Also because normally there's no so much access or diffusion about what is happening at the level of decision-making process of the European Union, especially outside Europe, but including inside the European Union. It is quite difficult to try to understand what is happening at the level of decision-making inside the European Union. So the reference would be done also to the reflection about impact of artificial intelligence over human rights. But before, we will try to reflect about the regulation which is ongoing, in process to be adopted. Well, firstly negotiated at the level of European Union, and then possibly will be adopted. Why I'm mentioning the level of European Union? Because one of the scope of the so-called AI European Act, you can easily find the regulation without quote the code number, just quoting, searching for EU AI Act, is a regulation, a proposal of regulation. And please pay attention to that point. Why I'm saying regulation, which is in the framework of the European Union sources of law, it is quite different from what we used to know as a regulation, because normally the regulation in every state can be considered as a mechanism of administrative procedural arrangement. Let me use those simple expression. In the case of the European Union framework, regulation is a very relevant source of law, because in the list of the available instruments, legislative instruments that the treaties founding the European Union, is the most impacting, the most relevant over the EU member states. In fact, a regulation, once adopted, is immediately executed, must be immediately executed or in all member states, with no difference, with no intervention by states through in accordance with their constitutional framework, of use of internal mechanism or legislative tool to execute it, is immediately effective once it will be adopted and published over on the European official journal. So it will be immediately into force and automatically in all member states. You see, once the regulation will be adopted, the relevance it can have for European member states, but also for, and inevitably, third states outside the European Union. Why I say that? I can give you an example. The regulation on general data protection, of course, is another regulation. It entered into force immediately and immediately executed in all member states, and impacted also outside in the relationship within third states. Think about the relationship between the European Union, for example, and the United States. When the control or over data privacy is lower than the European Union. Or in, I think, for example, into the exchange data between United States and the European Union over travelers, over travelers by flight, for example. The block of the General Data Protection limited such exchange to protect the privacy of European Union citizens. Likewise, on the same time, you see that potentially, once it will be adopted, the Artificial Intelligence Act of European Union will be inevitably impacting over the relationship between third states. However, don't be so happy about the existence of an ongoing process of adoption of a regulation. At least I'm not so happy, because you must understand that in European Union, the advancement of the regulations over so global challenging issues like climate change, like artificial intelligence, like public health emergencies, and so on, and especially in the case of artificial intelligence, are always reached starting from the regulation of the internal market. In other words, including the proposal over the regulation of artificial intelligence into the European Union is based on Article 114 of the Treaty on the Functioning of European Union, which regulates the harmonization of internal market between member states inside the European Union. So you see that the basic aim, one of the basic aim, is to try to regulate the use of artificial intelligence to don't breach the internal market, to continue to guarantee the normal life of the internal market of the European Union. One of the pillars of the European Union. Don't forget that the European Union was created so many years ago as an organization based on economic cooperation before everything. In fact, the Court of Justice of European Union over the years developed the protection of fundamental rights inside the European Union by case law in absence of a Charter of Fundamental Rights, which has been adopted with the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009. Only in 2009, since the foundation of European Union in 1957. In fact, the regulation on artificial intelligence quoted in the first part, because the first part is really interesting since includes an explanatory memorandum of the aim, the justification to use the regulation instead of a directive, and so on. We are going shortly to have some points about that. But before, let me just to put over in front of you the difference about the regulation as already explained in the directive. A directive it is just a legislative instrument that the European Union used to reach an obligation, but it allows member states to do it autonomously in accordance with the constitutional law framework. So the European, really quickly, in the case of a directive, the European Union say, okay, we need to reach such objective in such time. You, state A, member state A, has have X time to reach that obligation according, and you are free to choose the means how to reach such obligation. That's the fundamental difference between the directive and the regulation. There's no intervention of states into the regulation once it is adopted and into force. The intervention of member states is at the step of negotiation and definition of the text. How it occurs? Through the ordinary legislative procedure, also enshrined in the foundational treaty of European Union. Which one? If I'm right, is Article 288 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. So it involves all the institutions of the European Union. The power of the initiative is into the hands of the Commission, European Commission, which is, let me use that comparison to be more clear, like a supranational executive institution. So it introduced the proposal, but then the decision must be adopted without entering into the details of the procedure, because we have unfortunately not so much time for that. But of course, I will remain available after the lecture for additional clarification. I will share the contact with you with no problem. So the point is that in the process of negotiation, you have two contingent intervention. Is a sort of kind of a little dialogue maybe between the Council of European Union, composed normally by the ministers of member states competent for by matters, by topic. For example, just to give an idea, in the case of the artificial intelligence, the competent ministers of member states are ministers of innovation, for example. So the Council of Europe takes that form, composed by those ministers. And at the same time, there is a very big influence and participation, active participation by the Parliament of the European Union, which is composed by the representative of all parliaments, well, not all parliaments, all nations of European Union. There is an electoral process which will take place next year to renew the Parliamentary Assembly of European Union, actually. And each state elect the representative to the European Parliament. So you see, there is a very complex mechanism, but the influence of the Parliament and the specific commissions inside the Parliament in the study, negotiation process, and so on of the text, especially in the case of artificial intelligence, is really relevant and really important, because it gave the support and the needed and requested the centrality to human rights respect of possible consequences of the use of artificial intelligence. In the case of the regulation we are talking, there is also an additional contribution, because the Commission, the European Commission, in order to prepare the proposal, opened the debate within civil society and all involved stakeholders, including business world. So it created a sort of high-level task force on artificial intelligence, accepting possible criticism or possible elements in needs of change or verification, and so on. So the result was a very extensive proposal, which, as I said, include a very interesting part of explanatory part, which is a memorandum. But what is interesting, since we have not sufficiently time, is that the explanatory part also make a reconstruction of the process that conclude with a proposal adopted by the European Commission and submitted to the Council of European Union and the Parliament. Since 2017, actually, the European institutions, so you see, well before the start of the pandemic, the Council of European Union expressed the necessity to take action in front of so-called emergent new trends in the use of technology and artificial intelligence. So, of course, the pandemic put a sort of anxiety, if I may, to the European Union institution, and especially to the European Commission, to try to find the way to adopt at least a good proposal to be reviewed and negotiated. So I will omit the reference to all the list of special meetings in presence and online held under the different presidencies of the European Union, the meeting of the Parliament. There are a lot of resolutions of the European Parliament calling upon the attention of all stakeholders involved into the decisional process and into the use of artificial intelligence, especially to pay attention and to try to reach an agreement about the text. So one of the aspects, maybe innovative or not, I don't know, but the structure of the proposed regulation is divided by scale. In other terms, is based on a scale of risks: an acceptable risk, middle risk, middle risk, and low risk in the use of artificial intelligence. An acceptable risk. An acceptable risk is the use very, how you say that, in very simply, simple terms, is like the use of by multinational enterprises and especially states of artificial intelligence to control population. Or one of the, because the regulation is interesting because include a list of, for each category, a list of risks. Under high risk, you can find that one, but also you can find the high risk of use of international, of artificial intelligence to set up CVs and physical bias or characteristics to select people to reach a job. This is totally against other European Union law and policies. In fact, you must think that this proposal has been adopted by the Commission, taking into account the existing legal framework regulating other sectors, and of course also policies framework, especially, as I mentioned, the regulation of data, then the legislative framework against discrimination, especially gender discrimination, and also the existing framework over and all their existing framework in order to avoid, firstly, duplication, and secondly, to try to prevent as much as possible the impact over fundamental rights. So the intent doesn't mean that the present text is accomplishing in a comprehensive way in this aim to prevent the abuse of the use of artificial intelligence. But there is at least a tentative. In fact, I mentioned the reference to the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So the regulation is based on the applicable articles of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union as a legal basis, of course, but it is also adopted in the framework of a series of articles quoted in the same regulation of the European Union Fundamental Charter, the respect for human dignity, Article 1. Article 7 and 8, the right to private life. Including Article 37, the right to an healthy environment. So for the first time, a proposal of regulation of the use of artificial intelligence pay attention at least in minimum part of possible impact of the use of artificial intelligence into the modification of environment. And you see how much important is this aspect. Some critical points. The question is that there is no control, no clear mechanism of control in terms of prevention of possible abuse of such instruments. But of course, there is no clear mechanism, at least a very clear judicial and effective judicial system created to sanction and punish possible abuse. Why I mention this is, of course, my opinion in the analysis of the Act. Why I say that? You see that I put the accent about prevention first and then sanction. Because, and this is a very general rule, including for international legal order, even if sometimes at the present time we are going to forget that, law in general terms has the function to prevent violation and to harmonize the relationship between the society members, to guarantee the civil life. Once it failed to do it must have also a sanctioning phase towards who breaches the rules guaranteeing the civil life. So you see the other face of the use of law, which is not necessarily criminal law, but it can be also an administrative sanction, which is the case or an economic sanction, which is the case included in such regulation over artificial intelligence. In fact, in case of breaches of such regulation, there is a series of different amount of economic sanction over those enterprises operating into the European Union member states or into the European Union internal market, better said, which can be calculated over the 6% of the budget of the multinational enterprises. About the effectivity of a possible sanction, pecuniary sanction, we cannot have an answer at the moment, at this stage, but we can reflect and think that, for example, a very big multinational enterprises has no problem to pay 6% of the budget, of course. What remains unclear, in my view, in the regulation is how to get justice to people victims of discrimination because of the abuse of the regulation of artificial intelligence. Because remember that the effectiveness of human rights is always, from one side, a matter of good policies of implementation of the law, but on the other side is a topic, is a question of justiciability. So who is entitled to give me justice in case of a violation of a right? In case, for example, that some employer uses a mechanism, an algorithm, to search the right person for a job, but such algorithm finally has been programmed to select people on the basis not of competencies, but on the basis of gender, for example, sexual orientation, race, including color of skin. Because the mechanism is, there are mechanisms so advanced that can distinguish or programmed to discriminate on the basis of that. So on the side of people against whom I must submit a prayer, what I can ask, how I can demonstrate to be discriminated in the selection process when from the other side, it has been a machine, a programmed machine to do it. Who is accountable for that? The owner of algorithm, the creator, who take profit from that, the administrator of the enterprise. You see that many questions remain unanswered. And this is very critical because they are also points included, criticals, in my view, inside the proposal of the European Union regulation. It is very complicated, but I think that, and I used to always find the positive side, including when it seems that there is no one. I think that the idea and the volunteer, at least to find an agreement and to regulate that, is just a positive step. Is a positive step because from this side in European Union, no state is able to try to regulate autonomously and alone. That, in fact, one of the principles on the basis of which the European Union adopted the proposal is the principle of subsidiarity. One of the basic principles of the functioning of the European Union and the separation of competencies between European Union at supranational level and the European Union member states. So in absence of a regulation at national level, the European Union find the necessity to regulate that and has the power to do it in absence of a single regulation. This is always enshrined into the very complex structure of the European Union functioning, institutional design, and so on. So the other point is that it seems that the regulation proposed by the European Union, in my view, leave too much freedom to the economic stakeholders, the economic subject operators into the market. A sort of too much confidence from my view, without necessity to limit so much their action. And this is a very critical point from my point of view, because you know that an economic stakeholder is always interesting to take profit. So it can be very critical from my point of view. So, but the other positive thing is that, as initially I said, like in the case of the adoption in Europe of the general rule about data protection, the existence, the definitive once it will be adoption of a regulation conforming all member states can be used as a step, a basic step for global regulations, maybe. To limit in some way possible impact in international treaties, especially between European Union and third states. Let me just do reference, reflecting in a perspective what jurists we should use to do. In a future perspective, think, for example, about the economic agreement existing between European Union from one side, of course, according to European Union law, who is entitled to negotiate treaty with third states is always the European Commission, which has detained the major external power in terms of execution. So the European Union has a lot of trade agreements with third states, right? Especially in the Asia Pacific, but not only. In that case, imagine that in the framework, we are just doing an hypothetical case to help you to reflect. Imagine that in the framework of a trade agreement between the European Union and a third state, there are a group of multinational enterprises operating extraterritorially, I mean based in the European Union territory, so it doesn't matter which one member state, but exerting a part of their action outside the territory of the European Union and inside the territory of the third state party of the agreement. And imagine that such enterprises acting, I don't know, in Vietnam and Malaysia, whatever state you want, decide to select people for a job. And that enterprises, to do it, of course, use artificial intelligence and faces recognition. And finally, not on the basis of competencies and qualifications, will select the job seeker on the basis of the facial recognition, the face recognition. Only for that. So who is excluded from the selection for nationality, racial or ethnical characteristics, and so on, will never know that the reason has been that, or it would be really difficult to know that it is. But imagine that can reach the information that the really reason to be excluded has been the abuse of artificial intelligence by the European enterprises acting abroad. Who can help that person to reach justice in that agreement? Is the multinational enterprises based in European Union accountable according to the Artificial Intelligence Act of European Union also for the abuse outside the territory of the European Union of the use of artificial intelligence? This is a very relevant question that we can just consider, we can just take into account to monitoring the development and the advancement of the definition of law, which is not only made by decision makers, of course, but also and especially should do by judicial power, including and especially supranational jurisdiction. In the case of the European Union, it would be really interesting to see what kind of role the Court of Justice of European Union will have to limit and recognize accountability of such enterprises for their work, for developing their action, abusing of the use of artificial intelligence in the trade agreements, because the competencies to deal with possible conflict emerging in the framework of a treaty, of a trade agreement between the European Union and the third state, normally is of the Court of Justice of the European Union, unless there is an expressed clause inside the same treaty, including an agreement between the parties to recognize the authority of another mechanism to deal with possible conflicts emerging in the framework of the treaty. That's really interesting. You see that the regulation is in place in European Union, but the possible effects, we are no longer living now under physical borders, right? So you see the possible effects, the ocean of consequences that can be in place in case of adoption of such regulation. But as I said, the positive thing is the starting, the continuous process of negotiation. And of course, the need to entail international cooperation, not just at the level of European Union regulation, to have a global framework. Because as I said now, since the start of the pandemic, during 4 years, we are assisting to challenges which are not challenge for one state, two states, or three states, are global. So global challenges need global solutions. And you can say, okay, global solution, but what is this? What is it? Global solution means that I pick the best from every country to give the best answer to the maximum for all. This is international cooperation. This has been always international cooperation, and I'm an idealist, and we must return to be idealist, because separation, let me go to conclude with the general observation, starting from the negotiation of artificial intelligence, but that general principle must be applied, or can be applied, better said, to all negotiation. The aim of international cooperation, according to the old international legal order, was to make interest of each state. Nowadays, we can talk about regions, but I don't really like to talk about that, because it's the step forward or the step ahead of the crisis of multilateralism, in my idea. So in front of who separate to prevail, it's a Latin expression, divide et impera. We must remember that no separation is possible when we are facing global challenges. Just to give you an example, I'm based in the northern part of Spain, which is an Atlantic region. So sometimes normally we have no high temperature, but this year, incredibly, we are over 30 degrees Celsius temperature in June. This is global warming. This is climate change. The same that provoked incredible storms in the United States, in the South Asia, and so on. So what we should do, especially when who is in charge of take decision seems to go in the opposite way, so to block cooperation from the bottom level of which we all we are part, we must strengthen cooperation, because we know the problem, we live first the problem, we have limited instruments alone, but together we have all possible instruments needed to face, to take action against the global challenges. So I think I will stop here with this general observation. And I don't know if there is any doubt or questions from the audience. Someone has any doubt? Madam, I don't know if there is any questions on the chat.
Ma'am, we'll take the questions at last.
Okay. don't fear. I'm online. I cannot be angry if you say something that I don't like. I'm joking. I'm joking. Remember that adults can't can be unfounded, so with no justification, but it is never wrong. So always has a doubt, always be critical, never accepted that Facebook said blah, 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 so Facebook said that, or any other kind of news. Yes, I see Mr. Bagaipo.
Professor Dr. Elia, good evening from Philippines. I am Bonnie.
Good evening.
It's a pleasure to listen from your remarkable message this evening. I would like to ask, ma'am, actually, thank you so much for the knowledge that you have shared. You're right that there are questions remain unanswered on who will be held accountable or who will be held criminally accountable that will lead also to civil damages in embracing the artificial intelligence. You have said earlier that these questions remain unanswered on, is it the person who create this algorithm, or is it the company that adopt this algorithm? But may I ask Professor Dr. Elia on how long will these questions remain unanswered?
Yeah, at this stage they are unanswered. I think that we can just, thank you very much for your questions and interest. We can only view the effect step by step. Once we have a legislation in place and practice will be developed, I trust into the interpretation of existing law. And the other point, you mentioned the criminal aspect of a possible abuse, right? So remember that one of the basic principles of criminal law is nulla pena sine lege. That means that, and accordingly to human rights law, the primary, the responsibility to protect, guarantee, and give effectiveness to human rights and to protect people is into the hands of the state. But be careful, the responsibility of state, it is not only over its citizens, it's over all people under their jurisdiction, according to the 3 first articles of joint articles of International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights of United Nations. Just to quote the two of the most important. So that means that to think about any possible criminalization or level of criminalization of an abuse or in the consequences of such abuse, it is always into the hands of a single state to modify, in the case of civil law states, the criminal code, the criminal procedural code, and so on. But it is always, it is also clear that in absence of a general definition of limits of the use of artificial intelligence, every single state will be in serious difficulties to find the difference, to attribute responsibility, recognize who is accountable and who not, who doesn't. So that's why there is also, this is something that we are going to see case by case, and especially how the higher courts in single states, constitutional, supreme, it depends from the different constitutional systems, right? Will going to interpret that. Let me just to make an example about the role of Supreme Courts in states, not only human rights jurisdiction, but the role of the Supreme Court in to go a step forward, interpreting in a teleological way and in accordance to the principle of pro persona. So to the advantage of the protection of the individual. Let me just to do reference to cases of hate speech prevention or sanctioning in that case. There is a very interesting case of the Supreme Court of Spain, which sanctioned and recognized the criminal responsibility of a YouTuber, even in the absence into the criminal code of Spain, or to the reference of the use of online platform to incite to a threat. This is the role of the judge. Without entering into the merit of the case, the court said, doesn't matter which instrument you used, is always incitement to a threat. So he has been sanctioned, suspended from the use of any platform he had under his name was closed, and so on. Putting the accent, and I quote, over the need to protect the dignity of human beings. Doesn't matter which mode you are using. It's always incitement to a threat. This is really crucial because there was no mention into the existing law about expressly to the reference of mechanism. On the other side, you have other hypothetical cases where the judge limits himself or herself to the existing positive law and say, okay, between the list of mechanisms that can provoke, risking to provoke, to provoking a threat, there is no mention to online platform. So I don't take any measure because there is not on the list. You see the different mechanism of interpretation. So it is really important, the level of judge, the level of litigation at national level, but it is also important to have a look to international human rights jurisdictions or quasi-jurisdiction, both inside the UN system and at regional level. And I can do another example about the important role that the human rights jurisdiction had in another area, in relation to another global challenge. I already mentioned climate change and the right to the healthy environment. I had the privilege to give lectures just in few lectures over the 4 years about those topics, and the last one just a few days ago for the Human Rights Commission of Turkey. And the contribution of the international judge, the international jurisdiction into the definition of what is a healthy environment has been fundamental, including to modify constitutions over the world, including the right to an healthy environment as a fundamental right. Like in the case of the Italian constitution, which has been one of the last to do it. Modifying Article 9 and Article 41 of the Constitution. Article 9 is in relation to the protection of environment, and Article 41 in relation to the exercise of economic activities, which has been modified to limiting the development of economic activities in terms of respect for biodiversity and environment. And it has been done just 2 years ago. Better late than never. no, I don't know if I answered to your question. So hope to visit the Philippines one day. You speak Spanish too?
Yes, yes, Professor. There are parts in the Philippines because we were colonized for 300 years. So there are parts of the Philippines who speak in Spanish. Like there are words in the Philippines like uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco. Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you to you. Thank you to you. So many questions from the audience.
Are there any other questions? You can raise your hands. We can allow you to unmute. Anyone from the participants, or you can just write your questions in the chat box as well.
I'm going to put my contacts and data on the chat. As usual. But also you can find me easily on LinkedIn. My name on LinkedIn is Antonietta, Raffaela, Elia. Okay. So I think that if there is no question, just Madam, allow me to please make some words, give some words of conclusion.
Sure, ma'am. Please proceed.
So first of all, I wish to thank you all, you, your previous colleagues taking part on this school, and all the students, undergraduate, postgraduate. I had the privilege to have online in these now 4 years. So in fact, I'm happy that I'm going to concluding the online presence for at least a while, at least few months, because I think that until now I have been fully online for more than 14 hours per day during 4 years. No in presence. So I'm really afraid from one side that I must suspend that kind of opportunity, which allow me to reach a very big and large number of students. They trust their patience to hear me, like you, all of you today. I will certainly return sometimes online, but in the future. For a time I need, because you know, I have been possibly the first person online in the start of the pandemic in 2020, and we are now in March 2020. We are now in June 2023, and I never stop it. I'm going to be possibly the last one to suspend the online because it cannot be the solution or the substitution to the human relationship. So since we are in a school of global law and ethics of the use of new technologies and artificial intelligence, emergency handed. So the use of platform should be an instrument, not a substitution of human relationship. And until now, that's why after 4 years, I will no longer accept online invitations, at least for a few months, just to give precedence to in-presence activities, lectures and conferences, and so on. So of course, I will remain always available for students for their doubts. That's why I'm again shared my contacts. I will have other engagement remotely, a lot of them. But now it's time to return also to me, the last one possibly within many, to return to have some normality. So I do really hope to see you all in presence one day. And I thank you very much, Knowledge Stats, for the initiative we created 3 years ago. I have been happy to support it and honored to have the trust of students from all around the world during the emergency. But now it's time to go to normality. So thank you very much. With those words, I embrace you all. And again, I wish you all the best in your career and in your studies. And of course, I'm a professor. I'm genetically modified to be a professor. So if you have any doubt, please feel free to reach me out. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was indeed a very knowledgeable and an interactive session we had. Also, thank you everyone for joining us today in this session. Thank you. Thank you so much.